"Do you know what scares me?" a woman whispered somewhere behind the crowd. "It's not that Ethan Blackwood is angry. It's that he almost never is." The grand ballroom of the Starlight Children's Foundation had fallen so quiet that even the soft music from the string quartet seemed distant. Hundreds of guests stood frozen beneath crystal chandeliers, their attention fixed on the same scene unfolding near the center of the room. Ethan Blackwood, billionaire CEO, business icon, and the man financial magazines called the most disciplined executive in America, stood completely still beside his pregnant mate. That stillness should have been reassuring. Instead, it made everyone uneasy, because anyone who knew Ethan understood one simple truth. The calmer he looked, the more serious the situation was. Noah Parker felt every eye in the room on them. At 7 months pregnant, he had already grown accustomed to strangers noticing him. What he had never gotten used to was how protective Ethan had become. Before the pregnancy, Ethan had been attentive. After it, he became something else entirely. He checked weather forecasts before Noah left the house. He memorized every doctor's appointment. He kept snacks in every vehicle they owned. He even rearranged his work schedule so he could attend routine prenatal visits. Noah loved him for it, but sometimes it felt overwhelming. Tonight was supposed to be simple. A charity gala, a few speeches, a donation announcement, then home. Instead, an uncomfortable moment had transformed the entire evening. A guest had approached Noah unexpectedly. The interaction had lasted only seconds. No shouting, no dramatic confrontation. Just a stranger ignoring personal boundaries and reaching toward Noah's stomach without permission. To most people, it might have seemed harmless. To Ethan, it clearly wasn't. Noah slowly looked up at his mate. The ballroom lights reflected in Ethan's gray eyes, but there was no trace of his usual relaxed confidence. His jaw was tight. His posture was rigid. Every instinct Noah possessed told him Ethan was fighting a battle nobody else could see. Around them, conversations had disappeared. Investors, politicians, celebrities. None of them seemed interested in the charity event anymore. They were all watching Ethan Blackwood, waiting, wondering what he would do next. Noah gently touched Ethan's arm. "Ethan," he said softly. The single word seemed to break through whatever storm was building inside him. Ethan blinked once before looking down. The tension in his expression eased slightly the moment his gaze landed on Noah. Then it moved lower, toward the curve of Noah's stomach. A familiar look appeared in his eyes. Concern, fear, love, all tangled together. "Are you okay?" Ethan asked quietly. Noah almost laughed. In a room full of people staring at them, that was the only thing Ethan cared about. Not his reputation, not the attention, not the whispers spreading through the ballroom. Only Noah, only the baby. "I'm fine," Noah answered. "Really?" Ethan nodded, but Noah could tell he wasn't fully convinced. That was the thing about Ethan lately. Every small risk felt enormous to him. Every unexpected moment became something he needed to control. At first, Noah thought it was simply excitement about becoming a father. Now he wasn't so sure. Standing beneath the chandeliers while hundreds of strangers watched, Noah realized there was something deeper hiding behind Ethan's protectiveness. Something old, something painful, something powerful enough to make the most composed man in America look as though he was holding himself together through sheer determination alone. And although nobody in that ballroom knew it yet, this wasn't the beginning of the story. It was the moment everything hidden finally started coming to the surface. 6 months earlier, before the whispers at the gala and before every stranger in a crowded room seemed to make Ethan Blackwood tense, Noah Parker had been standing alone in a pharmacy restroom staring at 2 thin blue lines on a test he had taken 3 times because he could not believe the first result. For nearly a full minute he simply stood there, blinking at the small plastic stick while his heartbeat echoed in his ears. Then he laughed. Then he cried. Then he laughed again. By the time he finally left the restroom, he had no idea how he was supposed to tell the most powerful man he knew that he was about to become a father. Ethan was in Chicago that week attending a leadership conference. Noah spent the entire flight home rehearsing possible conversations. Every version sounded ridiculous. By the time Ethan returned to New York 3 days later, Noah was so nervous that he nearly abandoned the idea altogether. The opportunity finally came on a quiet Sunday morning. Ethan sat at the kitchen island drinking coffee and reviewing reports on his tablet while sunlight streamed through the penthouse windows. Noah placed a small gift box beside his mug and immediately regretted every decision that had brought him to that moment. Ethan glanced up with mild curiosity. "What is this?" he asked. "Just open it." Noah could hear the nervousness in his own voice. Ethan set the tablet aside and lifted the lid. Inside rested a pair of tiny white baby socks. For several seconds he did not move. Noah actually wondered if he understood what he was seeing. Then Ethan looked up. The expression on his face was something Noah would remember for the rest of his life. Shock came first, then disbelief, then pure happiness, so overwhelming that it completely transformed him. "Are you serious?" Ethan asked quietly. Noah nodded. Ethan stood so quickly that his chair nearly tipped backward. He crossed the kitchen in 2 long strides and wrapped Noah in a careful embrace as though he were suddenly made of glass. Noah laughed into his shoulder. "You know I am still the same person I was 5 minutes ago, right?" Ethan ignored that entirely. "We are having a baby." Noah had never heard him sound so emotional. From that day forward, everything changed. Ethan downloaded parenting books onto every device he owned. He researched strollers during board meetings. He interviewed pediatricians with the same intensity he normally reserved for executive hires. Within weeks, an entire room in the penthouse had been transformed into a nursery. Noah found him standing in it one evening long before any furniture arrived. Ethan was simply staring at the empty room. "What are you doing?" Noah asked. Ethan smiled, trying to imagine who they are going to become. It was sweet. It was touching, and at first it seemed completely normal. But as the months passed, Noah noticed things that felt different. Ethan checked security systems constantly. He called whenever Noah arrived somewhere, and again when he left. He hired an additional driver even though they already had one. During routine doctor appointments, Ethan asked so many questions that nurses occasionally laughed. Yet the strange part was not the behavior itself. It was the look Noah sometimes caught in Ethan's eyes when he thought nobody was watching. Beneath the excitement, beneath the joy, beneath the anticipation of becoming a father, there was something else. A quiet fear that never seemed to disappear. Noah tried to convince himself he was imagining it. After all, first-time parents worried. That was normal. Every parenting article said so. Every friend they spoke with shared stories about sleepless nights, endless preparation, and irrational fears. Yet something about Ethan felt different. The concern never seemed to fade. It only adapted. One afternoon, Noah returned from a routine visit to a local art supply store and found Ethan standing in the penthouse living room speaking quietly with a security consultant. Blueprints were spread across the dining table. Additional cameras, new monitoring systems, emergency response upgrades. Noah stared at the display before looking at Ethan. "Are we protecting a family or a national treasure?" he joked. The consultant laughed politely. Ethan did not. "There is nothing wrong with being prepared," he replied. Noah wanted to argue, but he let it go. A few weeks later, during a prenatal appointment, the baby kicked hard enough for both of them to feel it at the same time. Noah smiled instantly. Ethan froze. His hand remained against Noah's stomach, his eyes widening with something that looked almost like wonder. For a long moment he said nothing. Then a smile slowly appeared across his face. It was one of those rare smiles that completely transformed him from intimidating executive to excited future father. "Did you feel that?" Ethan asked. Noah laughed. "I think the entire building felt it." Ethan kept his hand there for several more seconds. The joy on his face seemed genuine. Yet later that evening Noah caught him sitting alone in the nursery after midnight. The room was nearly finished now. Soft lighting, a rocking chair, shelves filled with books, tiny clothes folded neatly inside drawers. Ethan sat quietly in the rocking chair, staring toward the crib. "You know normal people sleep at this hour," Noah said from the doorway. Ethan looked up and smiled. "I could not." "Why?" Ethan hesitated. "I was thinking." Noah crossed the room and settled carefully into his lap. "About what?" Ethan wrapped an arm around him automatically. "About whether I am ready for this." Noah blinked. Of all the answers he expected, that was not one of them. Ethan Blackwood managed a company worth billions of dollars. He negotiated international contracts without hesitation. He made decisions affecting thousands of employees every day. Yet becoming a father apparently terrified him. "You are going to be amazing," Noah said quietly. Ethan lowered his gaze. "I hope so." There was something about the way he said it that lingered in Noah's thoughts long after the conversation ended. Not doubt, not insecurity, fear. Real fear. As the months passed, the feeling only grew stronger. Ethan never missed an appointment, never forgot a detail, never stopped checking on Noah. Some mornings Noah woke up to find Ethan already reading new medical research over breakfast. Other days, he found him reorganizing emergency contact information for the third time that week. It became a running joke between them. Noah teased him constantly. Ethan accepted it with a smile. But beneath the laughter, Noah sensed something he could not quite understand. Then came the invitation to the Starlight Children's Foundation Gala, one of the largest charity events of the year. Hundreds of influential guests, media coverage, public appearances. Noah was excited. Ethan was not. The moment the invitation arrived, a strange tension settled over him. He agreed to attend, but Noah noticed the hesitation immediately. Looking back later, Noah would realize that was the first warning sign. Because while everyone else saw a successful CEO preparing for a charity event, Ethan seemed to be preparing for something else entirely. Something he feared was coming. The gala arrived on a cold Friday evening in early November. Manhattan glittered beneath a clear sky while luxury cars lined up outside the historic Grand Astoria Hotel. Noah stood in front of a full-length mirror adjusting the sleeve of his navy blue formal outfit while Ethan waited nearby. "You realize this is a charity event, not a diplomatic summit," Noah teased as he watched Ethan check his watch for the third time in 10 minutes. Ethan offered a faint smile. "I know. Then why do you look like you are preparing for a crisis?" For a moment, Ethan did not answer. He simply stepped forward and adjusted Noah's collar with careful fingers. His gaze lingered briefly on Noah's stomach before returning to his face. "I just want a night to go smoothly." Noah laughed softly. "You say that every time we leave the house." "Because I mean it every time." The drive to the hotel was uneventful, but Noah noticed something unusual when they arrived. Additional security personnel were stationed throughout the entrance area. At first, he assumed the event organizers had arranged it. Then he recognized several faces from Ethan's corporate security team. "Ethan." "Yes." "Did you bring your own security?" Ethan looked out the window. "A few people." Noah stared at him. "A few. There had to be at least 8. Ethan cleared his throat. It seemed reasonable. Noah shook his head and laughed, but the uneasy feeling returned. Inside the ballroom, everything appeared elegant and cheerful. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the enormous hall. A live orchestra played softly from an elevated platform. Guests mingled between tables decorated with white roses and silver candles. For the first hour, Noah genuinely enjoyed himself. He spoke with artists, donors, and community leaders. Countless people congratulated them on the baby. Many shared parenting advice. Some showed photos of their own children. It felt normal, warm, safe. Ethan remained close throughout the evening, not hovering exactly, but never far away. Whenever Noah turned around, Ethan seemed to be there, sometimes speaking with investors, sometimes greeting board members, always watching. As the night continued, Noah noticed other things. Ethan scanned rooms constantly. He seemed aware of every entrance and exit, every unfamiliar face, every unexpected movement. Once, while accepting a drink from a server, Noah caught Ethan observing the interaction from across the ballroom. Their eyes met. Ethan immediately relaxed after confirming everything was fine. Noah smiled. Ethan smiled back. Yet the tension never fully left him. During the foundation president's speech, guests gathered near the center of the ballroom. Noah found himself surrounded by dozens of attendees. People shifted positions to get better views of the stage. Conversations overlapped. The crowd became denser. Ethan was only a few yards away speaking with another donor. Then it happened. A well-dressed older guest stepped beside Noah. At first, there was nothing unusual about the interaction. The man smiled politely and offered congratulations. Noah thanked him. The conversation lasted only seconds. But as the man spoke, he suddenly extended a hand toward Noah's stomach in the familiar way many strangers unfortunately seemed to think was acceptable around pregnant people. The gesture appeared harmless, casual, ordinary. Yet before the man's hand could fully reach its destination, Noah saw something change across the room. Ethan had turned in their direction. The expression on his face disappeared completely. Not anger, not frustration, something far deeper. And for the first time, Noah realized this reaction had very little to do with the stranger standing beside him and everything to do with a fear Ethan had been carrying for months. Time seemed to slow inside the ballroom. Noah barely had time to register the older guest's extended hand before Ethan was already moving. Later, people would describe it differently. Some said he crossed the room in seconds. Others insisted he appeared beside Noah almost instantly. What everyone agreed on was the intensity of the reaction. Ethan Blackwood abandoned a conversation with a major donor mid-sentence and moved directly toward Noah with a focus that made nearby guests instinctively step aside. The older man immediately noticed him approaching and looked confused. His hand stopped in midair. Noah opened his mouth to reassure everyone that nothing was wrong, but Ethan reached them first. "Please do not touch him," Ethan said. His voice was calm, polite even, yet something about the tone caused the surrounding conversations to stop. The guest blinked. "Oh, I am sorry. I did not mean anything by it." "I know." Ethan nodded once. "But please do not touch him." The man lowered his hand immediately. Most people would have considered the situation resolved. Noah certainly did. Yet Ethan remained standing between Noah and the crowd. Not aggressively, not confrontationally, simply present, protective, completely focused on creating space around his mate. The foundation president paused his speech for a moment, noticing the unusual silence spreading through the ballroom. Nearby guests exchanged uncertain glances. Noah could practically feel hundreds of eyes settling on them. "Ethan," Noah said softly. "It is okay." Ethan looked at him. For a second, Noah saw something startling in his expression. Relief. Not because the guest had stepped back. Relief because Noah was speaking. Because Noah was smiling. Because Noah appeared unharmed. It was such an intense reaction to such a small moment that Noah suddenly understood why people were staring. They were not looking at a famous executive. They were looking at a man who seemed genuinely terrified by the possibility that something could happen to the person he loved most. Ethan exhaled slowly and placed a gentle hand against Noah's back. The gesture should have appeared ordinary. Instead, it seemed almost instinctive, as though he needed physical confirmation that Noah was still beside him. Around them, conversations gradually resumed. Music returned. The event attempted to continue. Yet the atmosphere felt different now. The story was already spreading through the room. Noah overheard fragments of whispered conversations as guests passed nearby. "Did you see that?" one woman asked. "I have never seen him react like that," another replied. "He looked ready to cancel the entire evening." Noah would have laughed if Ethan did not appear so unsettled. "You are making headlines without even trying," Noah whispered. Ethan did not smile. "I am sorry." That response surprised him. "Sorry for what?" "For drawing attention to you." Noah stared at him. Out of everything that had happened, that was what Ethan was worried about. Not his image. Not the awkward moment. Only Noah. Only whether he had made things harder for him. Noah reached for Ethan's hand and squeezed it gently. Nothing happened. Ethan nodded, but the look in his eyes suggested he was hearing entirely different words. For the remainder of the evening, he stayed close. Closer than usual. Every time Noah turned around, Ethan was there. Every time the crowd became dense, Ethan subtly guided him toward more open space. Every time someone approached, Ethan observed carefully before relaxing. Watching him, Noah finally stopped dismissing the behavior as overprotectiveness. This was not ordinary concern. This was not simple excitement about becoming a father. This was fear, deep fear, the kind that came from experience rather than imagination. And as the gala continued beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers, Noah realized a difficult truth. Somewhere in Ethan's past was a story he had never told. A story powerful enough to follow him into every appointment, every sleepless night, every anxious glance, and every protective instinct. A story that was still shaping his life months later. The gala ended shortly after 10 o'clock, but the questions Noah carried home stayed with him long after the ballroom lights disappeared behind them. The ride back to the penthouse was unusually quiet. Ethan sat beside him, one hand resting gently over Noah's, staring out the window as Manhattan drifted past in a blur of lights and reflections. Normally, Noah would have filled the silence with conversation. Tonight, he waited. Something told him Ethan was already fighting a battle inside his own mind. When they finally arrived home, Noah changed into comfortable clothes and found Ethan standing alone in the nursery once again. The room was dark except for a small lamp glowing beside the rocking chair. Ethan was looking at the crib, not admiring it, not smiling at it, just looking. Noah stepped into the room and quietly closed the door behind him. You do that a lot, he said. Ethan glanced back. Do what? Come in here and stare at furniture. For the first time that evening, Ethan actually laughed. The sound was brief but genuine. Noah walked over and sat beside him. For several moments, neither of them spoke. The nursery felt peaceful, safe, the exact opposite of the tension that had followed them home from the gala. Finally, Noah looked at him. You have been scared for months. Ethan's smile disappeared. Noah continued before he could interrupt. Not excited. Not nervous. Scared. Ethan lowered his eyes. Noah, please. Noah squeezed his hand. Talk to me. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything Noah had experienced during the entire pregnancy. Ethan stared at the floor for several long seconds. When he finally spoke, his voice sounded quieter than Noah had ever heard it. There was someone before you. Noah blinked. The answer surprised him, though not for the reason Ethan probably expected. He had never imagined Ethan had lived his entire life alone. What surprised him was the sadness that immediately entered his voice. Her name was Emily. Ethan continued. A long time ago. Noah listened without speaking. We were together for years. We planned a future. We talked about having children. Ethan paused. His gaze drifted toward the crib. Then one day, everything changed. Noah felt his chest tighten. Ethan had always been private about his past. Painfully private. Now Noah finally understood why. Emily was pregnant, Ethan said quietly. We were excited. We thought we had all the time in the world. His voice weakened slightly. We were wrong. Noah reached for his hand again. Ethan closed his eyes. There was a medical emergency during the pregnancy. Nobody expected it. The doctors did everything they could. He swallowed hard. Neither of them survived. The room became completely silent. Noah could hear only the faint hum of the air conditioning somewhere beyond the nursery walls. Ethan stared straight ahead. After that, I buried myself in work. It was easier than dealing with what happened. Noah finally understood. Every security upgrade, every anxious glance, every sleepless night spent staring at the crib, every protective instinct. None of it had begun with this pregnancy. It had begun years earlier. Ethan had never truly recovered from losing the future he once imagined. And now, standing on the edge of fatherhood again, every fear he thought he had buried was returning. Noah rested his head against Ethan's shoulder. Neither of them spoke for a while. Eventually, Ethan whispered the words he had been carrying for months. I am terrified that history will repeat itself. Noah did not answer immediately. He simply sat beside Ethan in the nursery, listening to the quiet confession hanging between them. Suddenly, so many things made sense. The constant checking, the sleepless nights, the way Ethan watched every doctor appointment as though it carried the weight of the entire world. The fear had never really been about the present. It had been about the past refusing to let go. Noah shifted closer and placed Ethan's hand against the curve of his stomach. Their baby responded almost instantly with a gentle movement. Ethan froze. The familiar wonder returned to his expression, but this time it was mixed with something else. Vulnerability. Feel that? Noah asked softly. Ethan nodded. Yes. That is not fear. Another small kick. That is your child saying hello. For a moment, Ethan simply stared. Noah could see emotion building behind the careful walls he spent years constructing. I know you are scared, Noah continued. Honestly, I am scared too. Every parent probably is. Ethan looked down. You do not understand. Then help me understand. Ethan exhaled slowly. The day I lost them, I promised myself I would never allow that kind of hope again. Hope felt dangerous. Noah listened carefully. Then you met me. A faint smile appeared. Then I met you. And now, Ethan glanced toward the crib. Now every day feels like I am standing on the edge of something wonderful while waiting for it to disappear. The honesty in those words broke Noah's heart. Not because Ethan doubted their future, but because he had been carrying that burden alone. Look at me, Noah said gently. Ethan turned toward him. You are not living in that old story anymore. Ethan remained silent. Emily was part of your life. What happened was tragic. But I am not Emily. Noah placed Ethan's hand over his own. And this baby is not the child you lost. Ethan swallowed hard. Noah could see the struggle in his eyes. Years of grief were not something a single conversation could erase. But for the first time since the pregnancy began, they were finally talking about it. Do you know what I saw at the gala tonight? Noah asked. Ethan looked confused. A man who loves his family. Ethan immediately shook his head. I embarrassed you. Noah laughed softly. You think that is what everyone noticed? What else would they notice? They noticed a future father who cares too much, worries too much, and loves too much. Ethan actually smiled at that. That sounds exhausting. It absolutely is. The smile grew slightly. The tension in his shoulders finally began to ease. They sat together in comfortable silence for several minutes. Then the baby moved again, stronger this time. Noah laughed. Ethan laughed too. It was a small moment. Simple. Ordinary. Yet somehow it felt more important than any speech, meeting, or public appearance either of them had experienced that year. Because for the first time since learning about the pregnancy, Ethan was not staring at the future through the lens of loss. He was experiencing it as it existed right now, beside the person he loved, inside a nursery waiting for a child who had not even arrived yet and was already changing both of their lives. And although neither of them realized it at that moment, the conversation in that quiet room would become the turning point that carried them through everything that came next. The weeks that followed felt different. The fear did not disappear overnight, but it no longer controlled every moment. Ethan still attended every appointment. He still double-checked schedules and carried enough emergency contacts to organize a small city. The difference was that he finally allowed himself to enjoy the experience too. Noah noticed it first during a routine prenatal visit 3 weeks later. The ultrasound technician smiled as the baby shifted on the screen. Ethan sat beside Noah watching every movement with complete attention. This time, instead of searching for problems, he laughed when the technician pointed out the baby's stubborn habit of turning away from the camera. Already avoiding publicity, Ethan joked. Noah nearly fell off the examination table from shock. The technician laughed. Noah laughed. Even Ethan seemed surprised by his own sense of humor. For the first time in months, the future felt exciting instead of frightening. December arrived quickly. New York transformed beneath holiday lights and winter decorations. The nursery was finally complete. Tiny clothes filled the dresser. Books lined the shelves. A stuffed elephant occupied the corner of the crib as though standing guard. One snowy evening, Noah found Ethan sitting in the rocking chair reading a children's book aloud to the baby. "You know the baby cannot understand any of that yet," Noah said from the doorway. Ethan looked up. "Maybe not." He gently touched Noah's stomach. "But I can." Noah smiled. It was one of his favorite memories. A few weeks later, shortly after sunrise on a quiet January morning, everything changed. Noah woke with a strange feeling he could not quite explain. Within an hour, they were heading toward the hospital. Ethan remained calm on the outside. Inside, Noah suspected an entire hurricane was taking place. The drive felt both endless and impossibly fast. Hospital staff greeted them warmly. Doctors and nurses moved with practiced confidence. Noah focused on their instructions. Ethan focused entirely on Noah. Hours passed. The winter sun climbed higher before slowly beginning its descent. Through every stage, Ethan stayed beside him. He offered water, encouragement, reassurance. Sometimes he simply held Noah's hand. Whenever anxiety threatened to return, he reminded himself of the conversation in the nursery. This was not the past. This was their story, their family, their future. Then, finally, after months of anticipation, preparation, hope, and fear, the moment arrived. A healthy cry filled the room. Noah closed his eyes as emotion overwhelmed him. Across from him, Ethan stood completely frozen. For several seconds, he seemed unable to move at all. The nurse carefully placed their daughter into Noah's arms. Tears immediately filled Noah's eyes. Then he looked up at Ethan, the powerful executive who negotiated billion-dollar deals. The man whose name appeared on magazine covers and business networks. The man who intimidated boardrooms without saying a word. He was crying openly. Not from sadness, not from fear, from relief, pure relief. Slowly, almost as though he could not believe she was real, Ethan reached out and touched his daughter's tiny hand. The baby wrapped her fingers around one of his. Ethan laughed through tears. Noah had never heard a more beautiful sound. In that single moment, years of grief loosened their grip. The fear that had followed him for so long finally began to fade. Not because he forgot the past, but because he was finally holding the future in his hands. 5 years later, Noah sometimes found himself thinking about that night at the gala and laughing. Not because it had been funny at the time, but because it felt impossible compared to the life they lived now. The penthouse that once seemed enormous often felt too small for the energy contained inside it. Toys appeared in places neither adult remembered leaving them. Storybooks migrated from shelves to couches. Crayon drawings somehow found their way onto refrigerators, office doors, and even the walls of Ethan's private study. Their daughter, Lily Blackwood, had inherited Noah's creativity and Ethan's determination. It was a combination capable of exhausting every adult in a 10-mile radius. On a warm spring afternoon, Noah stepped into the backyard of their Connecticut home carrying a glass of iced tea and immediately stopped walking. The sight before him was one he wished he could frame forever. Ethan Blackwood, one of the most respected business leaders in the country, was sitting cross-legged on the grass wearing a bright pink plastic tiara. Lily stood in front of him with complete authority while holding a collection of colorful toy jewelry. "Daddy, do not move," she instructed. "You are ruining the royal ceremony." Ethan nodded seriously. "My apologies, Your Majesty." Noah nearly laughed out loud. Years earlier, the idea of Ethan allowing anyone to place a plastic crown on his head would have seemed absurd. Now he looked perfectly content. Lily carefully added another bracelet to his wrist before stepping back to inspect her work. "Perfect," she declared. Ethan smiled. "I am honored." Noah sat quietly on the patio and watched them. The moment looked simple from the outside. Ordinary. But he understood how much it truly meant. There had been a time when Ethan believed happiness could disappear without warning. A time when every joyful moment felt temporary. A time when fear followed him everywhere. Yet now, watching him laugh with their daughter beneath the afternoon sun, Noah saw none of that. The grief had not vanished. Some losses never fully disappear. But it no longer controlled him. It no longer defined him. Later that evening, after Lily had fallen asleep and the house had grown quiet, Noah found Ethan standing in the nursery that had long ago become a child's bedroom. The walls were covered with drawings and photographs. Shelves overflowed with books and stuffed animals. Ethan smiled as he looked around. "Do you remember when this room was empty?" he asked. Noah stepped beside him. "You used to sit in here for hours." Ethan nodded. "I remember. What are you thinking about?" Ethan looked toward a framed family photo sitting on a nearby shelf. It showed the three of them at the beach the previous summer. Lily was laughing. Noah was squinting at the sun. Ethan was smiling without realizing a camera was pointed at him. "I am thinking about how afraid I was," Ethan admitted. Noah slipped his hand into his. "And now?" Ethan squeezed gently. "Now I think fear convinced me that protecting the future meant worrying about it constantly." He glanced toward the photo again. But the future arrived anyway. Noah rested his head against his shoulder. Together they stood quietly in the room that had witnessed so much of their journey. Years earlier, Ethan had stared into that same space terrified of losing another family. Tonight he stood there surrounded by proof that love had survived, grown, and healed. And somewhere down the hallway, a little girl slept peacefully, completely unaware that she had become the answer to a question her father had carried for years. The future he once feared had become the greatest gift of his life. What would you have done if you were in this situation? Tell us in the comments. If you love Alpha and Omega stories filled with passion, loyalty, heartbreak, and second chances, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story.